Millions of Christmas puddings are brought for the festive feast. But what are the customs and history behind them? Our reporter Shan Robins caught up with a social historian to find out.
Christmas pudding has been on traditional Christmas menus since before the medieval period.
It began as a porridge called frumenti. And although we associate Christmas puddings now with a sweet pudding, originally, medieval times and just before that, it would have been full of meat. So you would have had porpoise, poultry, rabbit, pheasant, partridge, and it was more of a porridge. So instead of the solid object that you see here, it was more of a liquidy porridge, like a pottage, and made with almond milk. Then, as the years go on, you begin to, certainly by the 16th century, you start adding eggs and breadcrumbs, which we still use today to bind. Obviously, I've just got one egg here because it's wartime, but we use up to 6 or 7 eggs now to bind a Christmas pudding. So once we got to the 16th century, you would add your breadcrumbs, add your egg, and that would begin to make that liquidy porridge much more of a solid consistency.
In the Tudor period, alcohol began to be included along with dried fruit.
But then, of course, you get the Puritans in 1664 who ban Christmas puddings because, of course, it's very rich. The ingredients is why a lot of people now don't always like Christmas pudding, because it's incredibly rich. You've got the alcohol, so it's overstimulating your senses. So the Puritans weren't happy with that. So they banned Christmas pudding and also mince pies. So they were gone. And it wasn't until George I, he brought back the Christmas pudding and got rid of this idea of having meat, as in, we talk about mincemeat now, which was made with meat originally. So you get rid of the meat and it becomes sweet, because the Georgians had a really, really sweet tooth. So therefore you get lots of fruit and you get lots more spices. Spices were there from the medieval period if you could afford to put it in your porridge, in your frumenti, but then you start to they get richer and richer and richer.
In the late 40s, when there was rationing, people saved their coupons and had to be inventive.
What we have here is an example of a wartime Christmas pudding. Sugar was not so readily available in World War II because it was obviously rationed. So how do you sweeten your pudding? Well, you'd still have the dried fruit, but you'd also use grated carrot and grated potato. So this has got grated carrot, grated raw potato. It didn't have the almonds, nuts weren't available. The almonds was it's for a pre-war pudding, which we've got here, which was from the 1930s. So you would also use dates or prunes if you had any spare. So that would be the slight difference there.
In the 1930s, food was highly decorated, with almonds around the cake, showing that people could afford them both in the pudding and round it.
We've got the luxury of the nuts, and alcohol. Brandy is popular, rum was also popular, but again, if you didn't have that, you wouldn't be able to use it. And also pre-war, you also would have used zest of lemon and orange. During the war, you wouldn't have had any of that. But actually, it's incredibly sweet. When this particular pudding comes out of the boiler, it looks like treacle. So and carrots are a surprisingly good way of sweetening your puddings.
There are several customs associated with the Christmas pudding, including that it should have 13 ingredients.
The holly on the top of the Christmas pudding is supposed to represent Christ's thorns, crown of thorns. And also, when you're making a Christmas pudding, you should always stir your pudding from east to west, which is the nod to the wise men. It's a homage to the wise men. And lucky charms, or charms that we put into the Christmas pudding, not quite so popular now. I remember as a child we used to have the 5p in the pudding, but you can still buy them. But a traditional pudding, particularly in the Victorian era, would have had a wishbone, which if you got the wishbone, that meant good luck. A boot, which meant that you would travel. A thimble, well, not so good if you were a single woman. If you got the thimble in your Christmas pudding, it would have meant a year of spinsterhood. You also have a bachelor's button or a bell, which was extremely good luck. And so you have the different charms, and as I say, you can still get them today.
And if you're looking at recipes, plum is the old culinary term for raisins, so any recipe described as Christmas plum pudding will have a higher content of raisins. This is Shan Robins for That's Solent.